Razin the Roof, presented by the Central Indiana Realtist Association, a local chapter of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Our mission is to build wealth through homeownership by enhancing economic development. We accomplish this goal by informing, advocating, and educating in the communities we serve. And now, Razin the Roof.
Welcome and thank you for joining us as we're raising the roof. These programs are designed to show you how to build generational wealth through home ownership. I'm Priscilla Russell with United Real Estate, your agent with Hustle. And today my co-host is
Dolores Kennedy. I am here. I'm with B&K Realty, broker owner of B&K Realty.
Amy Nelson with Fair Housing. She's going to be our guest speaker today, and she's going to tell us what's going on in the fair housing industry at this time. But we're going to take a break, and we will be right back.
Hi, I'm Sherry Boudwin, a loan officer with First Merchants Bank. If you're thinking about buying your first home, give me a call. We have a no money down program and no private mortgage insurance. My number is 317-566-6123.
Welcome back to Raising the Roof. Today we have our special guest, Amy Nelson with the Fair Housing Center. I'm going to have Amy to introduce herself and tell our audience a little bit about herself.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on today. So my name is Amy Nelson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. So at the Fair Housing Center, we work to ensure equal housing opportunities for all. And we do that through the enforcement of fair housing laws, educating the public about what is housing discrimination, what is not. And then we also conduct investigations to uncover violations of fair housing law, as well as work within the State House and other places to try to make sure our housing policies are strong.
Great. Okay, thank you, Amy. One of the questions that I have for you today is, how do our home ownership rates in Indianapolis compare to state and national rates?
Unfortunately, here in Marion County, for those of your listeners who are in Marion County is very below state and federal home ownership rates. And it's really disturbing. In fact, since 1970, the home ownership rates here in Indianapolis, the state of Indianapolis, have basically either stayed steady or gotten worse, depending upon racial and ethnic groups. So we have a long way to go to make sure that our home ownership rates are where they should be. This is, of course, a national problem. We have so many racial disparities when it comes to home ownership between Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and whites. But here in Marion County, here in Indianapolis in particular, it's even more staggering, even more larger than it is at state or federal level.
Well, Amy, I'm really fascinated by the numbers that we have as far as the national number rate. And every time I see it, it almost makes you shudder because those numbers are so low. But can you tell us what the Marion County home ownership rate disparity between Blacks and non-white Hispanics? I mean, sure. Non-Hispanic whites, I'm sorry.
Sure. So just give you an idea, the national home ownership rate for Blacks or African Americans is about 42%, depending upon which year we take this, where I'm looking at 2019 numbers. So I think it's got a little bit better, but not much. But the national rate is 42%. Our Indiana state rate is 37%. Wow. And here in Marion County, it is only 34%. So there is 34% from 42%. I mean, big difference there between our local rate as well as the federal rate. The white home ownership rate, just give you an idea of the disparity that's there. At the federal level, the white home ownership rate is 72%. The state rate is a little bit higher at 74%. But here in Marion County, it's at 65%.
Mm-hmm.
So still much higher
Mm-hmm.
than the Black homeownership rate,
Mm-hmm.
but below state and federal rates.
Amy, do you know, does any of this have anything to do with possibly the banking centers or the banking industry having anything to do with that? I know that that's not the end all of it, the disparities, but could that have anything to do with some of the disparities that we're having?
Well, there isn't, any one thing. If there was, then we'd be able to, address
Mm-hmm.
it much easier. But it certainly is a combination of things, of which some of it is what you mentioned. It's, first of all, the historic disparities that have been in place. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that Blacks, Hispanics, certain religious groups were not able to access homeownership like other groups were starting back in the 1930s, when they were blocked from being able to get backed mortgages. Persons of color had to pay all cash for several decades, and that really kept then homeownership rates down. And of course, we had racial covenants, we had block busting, we had all kinds of things also that were working against people of color in being able to become homeowners. The Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. That made, all of these things unlawful, but didn't correct what had already been done. Our neighborhoods were already segregated because of these policies. We did not have equal numbers of homeowners when it came to people of color, because they couldn't get those mortgages that white homeowners could get. So we never effectively addressed it in 1968. And then you move forward where we have what we call modern day redlining, which is where some lending institutions don't make loans in certain neighborhoods. It's not that they're drawing a red line around them and refusing to go in there, but they don't do any marketing. They're not present. They don't have bank branches in those neighborhoods. And it's what we call modern day redlining, because essentially then they're not doing any business to Black borrowers or to Black home seekers in certain neighborhoods, which is just, like we say, a modern day form of redlining. So it's a combination of a number of different things. It's how credit scores are used. It's how generational wealth has not been passed down. It's the lack of knowledge of home ownership, because again, your parents or grandparents might not have been homeowners. It's a combination of a number of things that we really need to put our attention to and face and try to fix.
Well, Amy, is that one of the reasons they talk about reverse redlining nowadays?
Yeah, so reverse redlining is another form of lending discrimination. So where redlining was, as I mentioned before, drawing a red line around a neighborhood or saying, I'm not going to make loans to Blacks or Hispanics. That's what we call redlining, saying, I'm not going to do loans there. I'm not going to do loans in those neighborhoods. Reverse redlining is a little bit different. It's saying that I am going to do loans in those neighborhoods. I am going to offer products in those neighborhoods, but it's not going to be a good product. It's going to be subprime. It's going to have additional fees and costs. It might have high interest rate. It might have prepayment penalties. So that's what we call reverse redlining, and we've seen some of these cases nationally in recent years, as well as here in Indianapolis, that my organization has filed some complaints against rent-to-own companies who we felt were reverse redlining by targeting neighborhoods or populations with what we allege was a predatory product.
Amy, tell me, how does one discriminate in the reverse mortgage, in the reverse redlining that you mentioned? How does one, when someone goes into a bank and they want to buy a house in a certain neighborhood, how do they go about trying to not get that loan? If you got the credit, you've got the time on your job, you've got money, a little bit of money in the bank, how do they effectively discriminate against a minority?
Well, where we've seen this happen is, for instance, there's been some cases on the East Coast where lenders have targeted people who may have high equity in their homes. So they may have had their homes paid off, or may be very near to paying their homes off, and offered equity, But that equity came at a significant cost that maybe was in the fine print or people didn't realize, where they may not have realized that if they missed a single payment, that then their interest rate went up to 18% and never went back down. And so items such as that can be predatory. And a lot of it has to do with the marketing that a lender might do, where they target particular populations. A case out of the New York State area where a lender's marketing materials only targeted the people that were Hispanic or Dominican, and the flyers and everything was directed exactly, to them and not to white home seekers. And again, it was alleged to be a subprime or predatory product.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. And how does one, someone that goes in there, they may not realize what's being done to them, because what they're doing is they're excited about possibly purchasing a home, and they don't realize that the rates are higher. They're not getting the same advantages of a white borrower, and so they don't know that until after they've signed their John Hancock. Okay, so what can we do? We only got just a little bit of time, about a minute and a half. What can we do in order to help that not happen as much?
Well, I always tell people to trust your gut. You're probably going to pick up on certain cues that things just don't seem right, or how the individual is interacting with you may not lead you to believe that they actually want you to get a loan from them, or they're not fully answering your questions, or they keep directing you to a product that you don't think that you actually should take. To then contact an office like mine, the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana, because we can conduct an investigation. We can use something that's called fair housing testers to help us in uncovering housing discrimination, like secret shoppers. So contact our office and we can conduct an investigation, because it can be very hard for people to identify if they have been discriminated against.
And not always do you may not have that gut feeling, but it's sometimes, I tell a lot of people that, we don't actually, we'll ask our cousins, brothers, sister, and you don't always want them to do that. But sometimes if you just mention something to somebody else may pick up what you're not picking up. And so, but with that, we'll come right back, Miss Amy, so that we can talk a little bit more about that. But we appreciate you giving us the information that we need, information that we can use, that, people can, if they get that gut feeling, they'll know that, something's up and we need to do a little bit more investigating. We will be right back with Miss Amy Nelson.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Taylor, loan officer with First Merchants Bank, and I would love to help you with your first home purchase. We have a great program that provides a $7,500 grant depending on where you're purchasing and has a minimum credit score requirement of 600. Please call me at 317-566-7611.
Hello, I'm Dolores Kennedy, broker-owner of B&K Real Estate Services, where helping you buy or sell your home is what I do. Call me. You see the number. Call me. And we're back with Raising the Roof, and today we have Miss Amy Nelson, from the Executive Director of the Fair Housing of Central Indiana. Miss Amy, we are going to talk about the appraisal discriminations that's going on, and you've been doing a lot of investigating and stuff like that. So can you talk to us a little bit about what's going on in the appraisal industry?
Sure. So let me just go back a little bit and just, in case folks are not aware of this, but in the fall of August of 2020, there was a New York Times story that was published about a biracial couple in Florida who felt that they had experienced discrimination in their appraisal when they had gone to refinance. They just felt that the amount they had gotten was just really low. And this was a white husband, African-American wife, and they decided to conduct like a little test, and what they called whitewash their home. They took down pictures of their family and then their young son. They took down art, and the wife and the child left so that just the white husband was there to meet the next appraiser, and their appraisal jumped dramatically. And they felt then that the previous appraisal really did have some racial bias in it. That story made national attention, and it attracted certainly the eye of us here in Indiana, and we began talking about appraisal discrimination. And out of that came a case here in Indianapolis. And we actually have filed a couple cases now, but this particular client that we have here in Indianapolis lives in a historically Black neighborhood. It's seconds from downtown. The neighborhoods around it have all gentrified, and she was interested in refinancing her home as well. Her grandmother had passed away, and there was an opportunity to purchase her grandmother's house to keep it in the family. And she thought that she had the equity in her home to be able to do that. And her family's estate was willing to work with her, like on a price, so that it could stay in the family. So she went and got her home appraised. And the first appraisal came in at $125,000. And she had bought this home about 3 years prior for $100,000. It had been completely remodeled, taken down to the studs. Beautiful home. And it just seemed really low to her, considering that it was a hot sales market, the neighborhoods around her, the houses were appraising much higher, and she really questioned it, but the lender and the appraiser refused to change the amount. She then went about a month or so later, went to a different lender, had an appraisal done there, and it came back at $110,000. So just $10,000 in equity in the years that she had had the home. And it was just really stunning to her, and she really questioned it. And again, she challenged the lender and the appraiser, and they refused to change their appraisal amount. And at this point, she had had 2 hard pulls on her credit, and she just didn't know what to do. And then she heard me speak at an event about this case in Florida and what this family had done in whitewashing their home and then gotten this higher appraisal amount. And she decided to do her own test here in Indianapolis. And she did something similar. She took down all of her family photos, her African-American themed art. She took a boxed up clothing in her closet that might identify her as being African-American. She replaced books in her bookcase. She boxed up her hair care products as a Black female, boxed all this up, took it to her sister's house. So it wasn't even in her home. Only interacted with the appraiser over email, never disclosed her race as part of her lending forms with a new lender, and then had a white friend meet the appraiser posing as her brother. And her appraisal came in at $259,000 from $110,000 and $125,000 just a few months prior.
Amy, how do we get around that? And I know that may be a $64,000 question, a $64 million question, but how do we, she knew that there was something that wasn't right. She knew that. But how do we get around those things, and even getting the appraiser to go back and go over his numbers or come up with different comps? What do we do as real estate professionals? You as a as the director of fair housing, what do we do as an industry to get rid of that?
We have to keep raising these issues. Now, appraisal discrimination has been happening for decades upon decades.
Yes.
But right now, there is certainly more attention being on it, and individuals who can show that they may have experienced bias should receive attention right now. We need to keep these issues in the news so that we can get attention. The appraisal industry has told us that over 90% of requests for reconsideration are denied. Over 90%. That tells me something is broken. The system is not working effectively. There has to be changes made to the appraisal industry. There needs to be a more formalized appeal process for people who may have experienced bias that doesn't result in hard pulls to their credit, and a more fair review. We also need to make changes within the appraisal industry. The appraisal industry itself is overwhelmingly white. It's overwhelmingly male. It's 70% male, 30% female. It's about over 90% white as well. And that's because of how people become appraisers. That there's an apprenticeship program, and that ends up with appraisers basically being a family business, and people of color not being able to effectively break in. We also need to look at how we value homes. We talked about this just earlier in the show about how the Fair Housing Act may have outlawed discrimination, but it didn't correct the discrimination that had already happened. So historically, Black neighborhoods in particular have the discrimination baked into their values. And we've got to get that reset and ensure that people get the equity that they have earned and that they deserve, but doesn't displace them either. So there has to be a variety of different programs to try to address this.
Well, Amy, one of my concerns is when you're talking about discrimination in purchasing homes and so forth. Has there ever been any attention to sexual orientation, different identities, and all these as people? I've noticed getting discriminated against not only for race, but for other reasons, just because people don't understand certain things that are in their history. How is that being handled?
So we have seen this a little bit. It's been, I think, more of a challenge for LGBTQ plus to complain in this area because the attention so falls upon them. But there was some cases a few years back involving discrimination based on sexual orientation by a lender. And that was a case that was handled by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, where a lender basically refused to acknowledge the relationship of the couple because it was a same-sex couple versus an opposite-sex couple. And there was a settlement that was reached in that particular case. We've seen some studies nationally as well that LGBTQ plus fear bias within lending or within the sales process. Real estate agents very well can have bias in this particular area as well. Sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, my organization's position is that those are protected under the gender definition under fair housing laws at the federal and state level. So individuals who feel they may experience discrimination in lending or sales because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity or expression or for being transgender can file fair housing complaints and have those complaints heard. In fact, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has issued guidance on this, that individuals are protected under fair housing laws.
Okay.
Amy, how can our viewers determine if they've been discriminated against? What would be their best course of action to determine that?
If, for instance, there might be some cues. We had mentioned this before where you just have a feeling. There could be things that are much more blatant. We just got done talking about appraisals. If there's comments on the appraisal document about the neighborhood that identifying issues such as race or talking about gentrification or other items like that, those could be key. Lending discrimination in that particular area, there could be comments that are made, lack of follow-up, again, that lack of interest. Sexual harassment can occur. There was a lending case a few years back in which a lender was sexually harassing female borrowers and requiring sexual favors of them in order to process their loans. So all of that can happen, but watch for those comments, feelings, look at your documents. If something doesn't feel right, please feel free to contact our office, contact your real estate agent that you might be working with, and we'd be happy to look at that and see if it's something that we want to investigate further. At the end of the day, if you feel you've been discriminated against, you can file a formal complaint with the Indiana Civil Rights Commission. You might be able to file a complaint with the Indiana Attorney General's office, as well as a regulatory agency as well if it involves lending.
Okay, Amy, we've got some exciting information from you today. We appreciate all the things that you do as you attack fair housing here in the state and in Indianapolis and Marion County. So we really appreciate you coming out and getting up this morning and talking to us about fair housing. We just have enjoyed your day. So we have enjoyed everything. So we would like to thank her for coming, and you have a wonderful day. And thank you for attending Raising the Roof this morning.
I'm Karen Kelly, a broker with Fathom Realty with over 14 years of experience. As a realtor and a realtist, I advocate for my clients and value the trust that they put in me. What's important to you is important to me. Call me. I'm here to help.
Oh, what a wonderful day today at Raising the Roof. We had a wonderful speaker, Amy Nelson with Fair Housing. She really gave us some exciting information. Dolores, can you tell us a little bit about what was said today?
You know what? Amy talked about the homeownership rates on the national level, on the state level. She also talked about it as far as the Marion County, how low those rates are, and they are a lot lower than they are for the state, yes, which is really, really, really scary. And when we were talking about, different things that we could do to make some changes in that, it's going to take all of us to do something to make a change. What do you think?
Oh, I think so. And it's really a concern to me that all of a sudden you realize that you're in an area that we're not moving forward like we should be, according to what Amy was sharing with us. And even the information about the appraisal process and what one of our fellow homeowners went through in order to get the correct amount. And you're thinking that this is why some people wonder if being a homeowner is the right thing to do. And we're just trying to create generational wealth through home ownership. It was a lot of information today, and I really appreciate her being just straight and honest about some of the things that are going on right now. One of the concerns that I have that she talked about was the redlining for the banks, how they just outline certain places they're not going to give homeowners loans and things like that. That's just a real concern to me. Thanks, Amy. I appreciate you bringing those kinds of things to the forefront so that we know about it.
And that's our purpose here with Raising the Roof, is bringing information you can use. We want to make the public aware of the things that are going on. And so one of the things Amy said something about, if you get that gut feeling, if you feel something that's not right, then and it's like if you know something, if you do know better, you'll do better. Right. So if you feel something and you think it's not right, do something. And we want to thank you for being here today. We thank you for coming, and we expect to see you again next week at Raising the Roof.
Raising the Roof.